Well, praise the Lord. Hello, hello, everyone out there in KAZ Radio TV land. Good to be with you today, June the 21st. Actually, this is the summer solstice, so it's the longest day in the year. And so we are here at 1 o'clock in the 1 o'clock hour of the longest day of the year, and glad to be with you. I am so excited. Barb E is glad to be with you, just so we can continue our discussion. Let's talk about sex. And I know for the last couple of weeks or so, we've been maybe leaning a bit more toward relationship kinds of discussion, more so than sexual. But as I conveyed to you when I started kind of going down this road, is relationships, I think that, well, sex, ideally, I think the way God intended, sex should probably come out of relationships. And so sometimes we have the cart in front of the horse, and the sex precedes the relationship. So because of that, I think we've ended up with a lot of misunderstanding, especially as it pertains to the body of Christ, men, both men and women, and not really understanding clearly where people are. And for the most part, I think the sexual relationship is, and this may be a bias on Barb E's part, but I'm just saying this based on experientially, conversationally, things I've talked about with people, things I've come to understand. I think sex tends to be like a really, really important physiological issue for males. Not that it isn't important to women, but I believe that we women, for the most part, will kind of table that issue for a while, just in terms of trying to see where relationship will go, and if relationship will even be a part and parcel of the idea of having sex. I think the archaic mindset would say, well, Barb, if we just go with old King James Version of the Bible and what we have come to study and learn over the last several decades, there's really no room to even discuss sex apart from relationship, especially marriage. But the reason we're having this conversation for these last couple of weeks is because sex is happening with married and unmarried, men and women, and babies are coming, and many of these people are in the church. So ignoring the white elephant in the room doesn't make it disappear. So you have to finally just decide you're going to deal with things, but really be upfront. And that is why I made the decision, as I said a couple weeks ago, to start looking more at relationship, and even with putting a bit of an emphasis on where the guys are in this whole thing, what their mindset might be. And so I had just, as I said, I've been doing some research and looking at some things just so I could get a better understanding myself of why men respond the way they do, or even the lack of response on their part when it comes to a relationship between a man and a woman moving forward in a positive way. Like what are the hindrances? What are the downfalls? What are the pitfalls? What are the things that happen, unfortunately, that many times doesn't allow that whole thing to come to fruition? So last week I left you with a thought about the difference in the 20th century and the 21st century male. And I posed a question, and because I was telling you I was looking at questions and commentary that I got from research that I had done And it was a lot of dialogue with regard to where males were, what their perspective was on different things. And I really wanted to share that on this platform because I believe it's just good food for thought. And even though this information that I have, I'm not sure what parameters were in place as far as where all the information came from, the group that they polled, people that they talked to, economic status, racial balance. I'm not sure of any of that. I just know that most of what I was reading is commentary from males, and they range from the 30s, ages of late 20s, early 30s, all the way up to men in their late 60s, early 70s. So I thought that was a good cross-section of dialogue. So when I left last Monday, we left off with me talking about the conflict that the males feel about their role in a relationship. And so one of the guys said, many men feel that they know they have the responsibility of being a 20th century style dad, while at the same time being the 21st century husband who supports the family, and a guy who can be also at the same time sensitive to his woman. So right at the turn of the century, and for those of you that may not remember when this says the 20th century dad, I use the example of like the TV sitcoms that were popular back then, and it really pretty much posed a Euro-American family, middle to upper middle class family. When you look at Father Knows Best, the Ozzie and Harriet Show, let me see, My Three Sons, and that was a dad raising the kids by himself. The Donna Reed Show, all of those were a reflection of, we saw reflected in those sitcoms, the guy, the role of the dad, pretty much it ran along the same line in each one of the shows. He had a job, he provided a very nice home, he had a good working relationship with his wife, seemed to have a hands-on, loving relationship with his children, trying to be a guy that could really be understanding when the children were in any kind of a crisis, even if the wife was in a crisis. And so when they say 20th century dad, a lot of families, because picture's worth 1,000 words, people really did model some of those behaviors. They really did. And when it comes to us as a people group, us black folks or African American, the Negro, here in the United States of America, a lot of times we had a different model for family because many families back in the mid 50s, early 60s, and further back, whose parents, who would have been our parents, they kind of had a different setup. They might have had a family where they lived with, Big Mama was in the house and Uncle Sonny was there as well, and, maybe two of their younger cousins. And so the nuclear family was larger. It wasn't just this little idealistic mom, dad, and 2.5 children, a car in the garage, and a picket fence. It was other dynamics that were in place. And so I would say, as we continue to grow in the society and we continue to see images that we felt portrayed something good and nice, something that we wanted, we went after it. So this particular guy is saying he was wondering what his responsibility would be. And when he says responsibility, that right there puts him in a position to really be thinking proactively, like what role he has to play. Will he be successful in that role? Will he fulfill that role to his wife or his partner's liking? Will she be pleased with outcomes for him, her, and the family at large? And I'd say that's a lot of weight on a man. And so for that reason, that was one of the things the guy was saying is why They think long and hard about whether they want to actually tie the knot and make that walk down that long journey down that aisle. They really think a lot about it. So that was what we ended on last week. And I just want to add a comment with regard to last week's final remark. I think when we think in terms of Christianity and we think in terms of family, while we see a lot of things are so different now in society, and we're not seeing this normal, perfect little utopian family in place all the time as the model that everybody follows after, it still is ideal to be thinking about a roof over someone's head, food on the table, a place to sleep, and being safe. That is important. And while many times the single female head of household cannot always manage to do that by herself on one income, if there is a man in the home and the wife is there and the two of them, all I can say is the Bible says 2 is better than 1, because they have a good return or good reward for their labor. And so I think there's extra bonus in 2-parent families. And I believe not just because we saw it on TV as an image that was portrayed to us weekly, but I believe that that was the paradigm God put in place in terms of raising children and giving children a balanced atmosphere, a balanced environment out of which they could function. So, with that said, I said, well, okay, if that seems to pose a threat for men, and again, all of these things are factors that they look at in terms of having a relationship, but they're not really up for discussion, or they're not on the table when it comes to bargaining about whether they want to try to have sex with someone. You know, we can, cross that bridge at another time. So it's kind of like, we don't have to deal with that right now. But those thoughts are pretty much always in the recesses of a woman's mind. She's thinking in terms of long term, not short term, i.e. one night stand. Most women are not. So because of that, I think, because of that whole notion, I think that there tends to be, therefore, a breakdown in communication. Somehow, the guy may be talking about the cow's head and the woman is talking about the tail. It's kind of like we're at odds here with where we're trying to get on some common ground, but maybe we're not. And maybe the effort to try to do so can prove frustrating. But I think that males and females should still try to tackle it no matter what. It might prove frustrating, but there's got to be a place where there's common ground. So because there's an issue with communication, I then looked at some other things with regard to that. And so here's another quote from a gentleman who talked about how men are simpler than we women think. Now, I, for one, think males are complex, but I know men think females are complex. So this guy says, quote, "Women express themselves in subtle ways that are open to interpretation, and you can never be sure if one interpretation is more accurate than the other." I would agree with him on that. We do say things, we have different kind of a dialogue that can be somehow masked over with other meanings. However, he goes on to say, men communicate more along the lines of grade school math. So he's saying they're just real simple, down to earth. When he says 1 + 1, he means 2, and he doesn't mean 5 or 8. Or, I don't love you anymore. So when he says 1 + 1 is 2, he is not saying that 1 and 1 is 5 or 8, or he said 1 + 1 is 2, and he doesn't mean I don't love you anymore. He says what he means. And so that was really, really an eye-opener to me. So I decided to kind of delve a little bit more into the discussion around conversation, because I, for one, have been guilty of that. I remember talking to different gentlemen, and they would say, you know, A, B, C, and then I would repeat, you know, something that I thought was a reflection of A, B, C, and he deduced that I had repeated D, E, or F. And so this was like an oil and water conversation as far as he was concerned, because he basically was saying he didn't say that. And so I did kind of think he meant something else. So I would say that I have to agree with the gentleman with regard to his comment, because most men, they kind of shoot straight from the hip. I consider myself a person that shoots straight from the hip, but maybe in some cases I miss. So here we have many times the ability to communicate on a really good symbiotic level between males and females is maybe perceived differently on the part of both parties. The man is thinking one thing, the woman is thinking another. And it is critical to look at this early on if there's a breakdown in communication, because we do need to come to an understanding. So I wanted to look at a couple of instances. For example, the guy would say, or the woman would say she says, makes a comment and says, school for me was a real breeze, but I was awful in gym. I had a terrible time with gym class. So that's what she could say, instead of saying, I graduated magna cum laude. And the reason she doesn't want to say, now when she says school was a real breeze, that statement by itself means I had all A's, all A pluses, all hundreds, all smiley faces on my report cards, on my paperwork, right? So she's saying no problemo with her and her Einstein, mindset. But the reason that she doesn't want to say I graduated magna cum laude, which is the same as saying school was a breeze, but she said school was a breeze, but I was terrible in gym. The reason is because men find perfection intimidating, and they find flaws more lovable. Now, that was new news to me. I don't know how many of you all out there find that new news. Who knew? I mean, why not just tell the truth? If I graduated magna cum laude, can't I just say it? No. We have to mask it over with another way of communicating that. Well, I don't want to say mask it over. That sounds a little not good. I'll just say we have to say it in a different way so that I can be heard. And at the end of the day, I thought about it after I looked at what the gentleman said, and I thought, yeah. And I think if I say outright, I graduated magna cum laude, it does sound like you're tooting your own horn. And if you graduated magna cum laude and you end up having a relationship with this person, the person will probably, in the fullness of time, find that out. So to have to say it right off the bat, right off the rip, in the beginning of a relationship, I think it probably is, maybe I don't know if you're doing it for the sake of wanting to gloat or, be larger than life. I don't know why a woman would even say it. But to have the research that I saw and the interviews that they did with these men, to actually have that as an example, I found it really fascinating. I thought, wow, and so that then, what we then conclude is the reason they want you to say it in one way and not the other is because perfection is intimidating. Well, Barb E will confess to the mess right now. I have been found guilty. I've been sentenced as guilty, told that I was guilty of being too perfect. And I wasn't trying to be perfect. I was just trying to be me. And so this is interesting. And I have to say, for me, it's been a learning lesson just doing this research and studying it, because, You may meet someone, male or female. They can meet someone that they find a lot of fun, very fascinating. They enjoy being with them. But it's the little foxes, the Bible says. It's the little foxes that spoil the vine. And so if the comment or statement that I make and the way I make it is going to prove to be, like fingernails on the chalkboard, then that's going to be a problem. And at the end of the day, it is better to have a better way of saying something as opposed to saying it in a more, what might be viewed as in a negative context. So that was good to learn. But I wonder, just having shared that, for instance, I wonder what all is viewed as perfectionism by a male. Is it the way you talk? Is it the clothes you wear? Is it the look on your face? Is it the commentary? Like, is it the job you have? Is it the money you make, the car you drive? Like, I wonder how many areas. That's interesting, to think about. How many areas, because the gentleman said perfection is intimidating. So it's not that the female is purposing to intimidate the male. From the way the dialogue went, it sounds as if the male just finds himself feeling intimidated. So it's not necessarily the woman is doing this, it's just the way the guy feels. He feels intimidated. And then on the one end of the spectrum, perfection is intimidating, and way on the other end of the spectrum that we got flaws are lovable. Well, at the end of the day, all of us knows, we all know love works. Love never fails. And flaws are more lovable, I think, is a statement that says you're real people, is what the guy is trying to say. You're down to earth. You're real people. You're approachable. And maybe at the end of the day, it also means I don't have to compete with you. Well, looking at this perfection versus flaws, what's intimidating and what's lovable, if at the end of at the end of this, we can come to a conclusion that they can find common ground and actually find themselves in love with one another and can see themselves building a future simply because the female learned how to communicate on a level that the male could handle. If that's the prize and the takeaway, that's great. So now I'm wondering, is this going to be something females need to learn to do? Like, do we need to learn to practice this more often as opposed to just coming right out, bang, bang, bang with information that might be too harsh or too much for them to handle? I'm not sure. And of course, just because, and this is Barb E talking, just because you graduated magna cum laude doesn't mean you're perfect. We have a lot of cray-cray people who are brilliant geniuses and Einsteins, and all of that, but socially, they're gone. The lights are on, but nobody's home. They're gone. So academic accomplishment doesn't necessarily define perfection. So therefore, we're putting the label of perfection on this, academic accomplishment, and it sounds like it's a kind of an end-all and be-all to the person. And on the other hand, you're doing a greater buy-in on the flawed character, but the flawed person might have more flaws than you would want to deal with, and your love can only handle like so many flaws. And even though flaws are lovable, there's an end to what people, there is an end to what people want to tolerate. So you gotta have a pretty good balance here. I think while they don't want you to be maybe necessarily magna cum laude, they don't want you to be a Dumbo either. And so it's I guess it's all in the approach. It's all in the approach, how you say it, what you say, and how they perceive it. So that's fascinating. And so if any of you are thinking in terms of relationships that have gone south simply because there was a breakdown early on in communication over something, now maybe I was getting ready to say over something as minuscule as that. That's what I was getting ready to say. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe this is really major and it's not minuscule. I was about to say it's minuscule. But I'm wondering how much are women able to revolutionarily change their conversation to begin to see a takeaway even in this year of 2021 or 2022? Like, how long would it take for us to perhaps change our approach about things? Some women, they can do this stuff hands down. It's not even a big deal for them. They can do it, blindfolded in their sleep. But for other women, they have to work at it. They have to work at it. I would probably be one of those that would have to work at it. So let me give you another, for instance. The woman would say, what kind of things brings a smile to your face? What kind of things, brings you joy? Or what do you really like to do? What kind of things do you like? That's a better thing to say instead of saying, what goals do you have in place for the next 5 years? And I know for me, I have never asked a guy about his goals, but I think that's the generation I was from. I think that's the goal kind of conversation is more of this newer generation. I never ask about goals or things like that. And the reason they would rather you say, what makes you happy, what brings a smile to your face, that sounds better than asking him, what kind of goals does he have in place over the next 5 or so years, is because he wants to know that you're excited over him and not interviewing him about what possible lifestyle you all would have. Now that's strong. And you hear this whole thing about goal setting and, putting ideas in writing and, trying to accomplish your goals, even to the point of having a coach or a mentor and someone to help you to reach your goals. And that seems to have been such a primary focal point over this as we came into the 21st century. Everybody was making a list of their goals, wanting to accomplish their goals and things like that. I would have thought they would have loved to just disclose or share about different things that they were working on. But again, that might be perhaps better if it was voluntarily, shared on their part as opposed to you asking about it. So that means a lot to the guy, to not necessarily question about goals. And again, in a whole nother setting, maybe a business meeting, in a whole nother, setting with other people, that question could probably be a question you could, bring to the table. But again, in personal relationship, personal encounter, interacting, just one with another over dinner, probably a bad thing. And so for the guy to conclude that the takeaway is you're interviewing about your lifestyle, that's a real raw kind of a revelation. But am I here to say that women don't do that? I'm sure many women do. They do interview. They are probably doing somewhat of a, interview on the low, trying to find out what kind of future they could possibly have with the guy. So anyway, a lot of what we talked about today then brings the woman to a point of saying she wants to know, where is the relationship heading, and is there any good timing that lies ahead where she can tell the guy how she really feels about him. And how she feels and where the relationship is heading is a big part of, am I going to actually have sex with you? So that's the way that works. Anyway, I'm saying this because we're talking to people who are perhaps believers and Christians or not Christians. But for the Christian community, I want to just say our being able to handle a lot of this dialogue and talk about it and look at it is part and